in 1970, when Paul announced that the Beatles were splitting up, or the announcement came from an interview with Paul to launch the McCartney album. But John had already announced 6 months before that privately to the guys that he wanted a divorce from the Beatles. So that's all well known now. And then there was kind of a hiatus, and the whole world was wondering, what is John, Paul, George, and Ringo going to do next? Does Get Back mean the song Get Back? Does it mean that they're going to get back together or whatever? But anyway, it didn't work out. John went off and had his adventures with Yoko, and Paul got himself an old English double-decker bus and set off on a tour with the guys who were set the formidable task of trying to replace John, George, and Ringo in Paul's musical life. And there were Denny Lane, who was kind of a direct replacement for John Lennon. You had Denny Sywell, beautiful drummer, who was replacing Ringo, of course. And then you had Henry McCulloch, who was going to, take over the reins with Paul, with George. So the whole mission of that, they had done. Paul had a lot of downtime, even though he released the album McCartney. He was very, very. It's well reported that he was very, very depressed, and he went in a kind of a downward spiral for quite a long time, and he said this himself. He said until Linda said to him one day, look, you really don't want to get too crazy, and so he decided to pull himself together. And the next thing he said, right, I want to do what we did, and before the Beatles split and the announcement of when John wanted the divorce, that actually came in almost the same meeting as Paul said. Now, they hadn't done any live gigs since 1966 at Candlestick Park. And, George was kind of the first one to say, look, when we were in Hamburg in the early days of the Beatles, we used to enjoy each other. We could hear each other, buzz off each other. But with the screaming and all the rest of it, it kind of, made that kind of redundant. So I don't want to gig anymore. So then Paul suggested to the guys 3 years later, look, why don't we go and do some small clubs? We could go and do some small gigs. And they didn't want to know. But Paul was yearning to get back to that. Or get back. So sorry about the pun. So when the Beatles went their separate ways, Paul kind of looked towards his comfort zone, which was being on a stage with a bunch of musical mates. So that's what he wanted to recreate. So it was as important. There were tons of great musicians out there, and there wasn't a musician on the planet who didn't want to work with Paul. So he could have had his pick, he could have played safe, he could have gone the supergroup route and played just with Jeff Lynne and Eric Clapton and, Keith Moon and John Bonham and all those guys, do the supergroup thing. He wanted a bunch of musical mates, another bunch of musical mates that could go through hard times together, and let the music develop and let the band gel and come together. And so he was on a bonding mission. And I do a little write-up. I've done a little write-up to kind of illustrate that. Well, Paul McCartney's full name is James Paul McCartney. So I kind of put together James and Bond mission, to make it kind of a 007 thing. But that's what he wanted to do. Now, when the guys first got together, Paul was so nervous about doing gigs without John, George, and Ringo, that what would the crowd think, whatever. He did a really amazing thing. He just jumped in a transit, and jumped in a van with the guys in a trailer and just rocked up all of these universities. And the first one was Nottingham, and it was in the winter. It was like February 1972. And they just said, right, Paul McCartney's in the van. Would you like to come in and play at the university? And they said, oh, wow, okay. So nobody knew he was there. Next thing, a crowd came in, and they all cheered and stamped and jumped and hollered. And Paul went, oh, wow, okay, 50p on the door, bargain. So let's go in and see Paul. So in they went, and they had a good time. And there are some videos of those gigs, and lots of photos of like small crowds, and then the crowds start to get bigger. So that was kind of the chrysalis, where Paul knew that he was kind of among friends, but he wanted his big mission was obviously to play the big concert venues in the UK, and then the big eye, going to America, to the USA. So that's what he wanted to do. So after he'd finished the university tour, he felt, right, we're going to do a major tour, we're going to do a proper tour, and it's going to be properly publicized. And now I feel as though that we've broken out of the chrysalis. Here's the butterfly. Here's this truck, this bus rather. I want an old English double-decker bus, and I want it painted in a magical mystery tour, like Woodstock on wheels kind of deal. And he enlisted the help of Tom Salter and John Morris, the promoters, and they applied the paint, and they got hold of an amazing bunch of artists who are art students from Ipswich Art College, and they painted the bus over 3 days at Uxbridge bus station. And when the bus emerged, it looked absolutely amazing, and everybody knows what the bus is. That would, as I say, Woodstock on wheels.